Good morning. Hello,
Hi.
Letitia.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, good, good.
It is an honor and pleasure to be in conversation with you. I'm such a fan of your work. So thank you so much for setting time aside for this conversation.
No, thank you. I appreciate the support.
And so let's just jump right into the conversation. I mean, I've spent a lot of time looking at your works and thinking about your practice, but the folks watching right now might just want to know a little bit more about you. So, just to start off, like, where are you from and how did you become an artist?
I live in Texas. I'm in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and I've always been sort of a creative, but I started out in dance actually. I did ballet for most of my life, and then when I went to college, I was interested in photography, but my parents didn't really see it as as the right path, as a serious path that they were willing to pay for an education in. So I went in journalism, but was really inspired by this artist named Christopher James, who teaches at the or did teach at the Art Institute of Boston. And so at a certain point, I just decided I was gonna go for it and pay for the education myself. And I sold my car. I found a roommate online in the 90s and moved to Boston, where I had never even visited before, and spent the next 3 or 4 years getting a second bachelor's degree in photography.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, let's back up a little bit because I know this about you, but the folks watching might not notice. But you were a military brat.
Yes, yeah, yeah. It's an army brat. My father was a major in the army, and I was actually born in Augsburg, Germany, on one of his tours of duty, and he did two while I was growing up. So we moved around a lot, and I think I developed a sort of um, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like German because of how much time we spent there and the way they are. And I think during that time was when I became aware of art while we were in Germany because my mom was a big history buff and we spent a lot of time traveling, and I'm sure you're aware of just how much art there is in Europe. And we went to Paris and we went to all these different places, and that's the time of my life where I became aware of visual art, like painting and sculpture and all this kind of wonderful stuff.
But your roots are in the South. Like your father's from Mississippi, your mother's from Louisiana. You're
Yes.
actually like doing a Zoom call right now from my hometown.
That's right. That's right. They're
Outside of
from deep south. And
um,
that's played a huge role in who I am as an artist. Because even though I didn't grow up here, I lived for 1 year in Baton Rouge when my dad was stationed in Korea and we stayed here. But something about the South, we would come back and visit for holidays and summer vacations, and a big family here on my mom's side. My dad's family was smaller in Mississippi, but something about the color and the smell, like that red dirt after the rain, that smell, or the fields, or the pine trees when you drive through them, really had a big impact on me. And so this area has become home for me. My mom lives here now, and she's been here for the last 15 years or so. And I have a ton of cousins and aunts. My mom is one of 11. So there's a big family here in Louisiana. And so something about particularly Louisiana over Mississippi has become home for me and is really um, if I was to say what had the biggest impact on the work that I make today, it would be my experience of Louisiana.
yeah, and I can totally see that. I mean, when I saw the work, I immediately connected with it as a black person from
Mhm.
Louisiana, and even
Yeah.
just the colors, like you said, like I like connected with the colorways. Like
Mhm.
it looks like the landscape of
Yeah.
Louisiana.
Yeah.
But if you had to describe your creative practice for folks who might not have seen your works,
Mhm.
how would you describe it?
That's a good question, and I get that question all the time. What do you call yourself? I am first and foremost a photographer. Like every work, every body of work that I make starts with the image, and I shoot in a style that's very documentary. Um, I like a small, like handheld camera where I can work like a street photographer, even if I'm shooting landscape or portrait. And the works, the images are printed onto fabric. And I like using cotton fabric. There's a connection for family and culture there for me. And the works, they get printed on the cotton. Sometimes they're presented in frames. Sometimes they're made into dresses. Sometimes it's a quilt or quilt top. They take different forms. Sometimes I print onto vintage. I love printing onto vintage materials, like something that's already had a history built into it, like a flour sack or a sugar sack. And even in a project a few years ago, I found some of the old cotton sacks that they used to drag through the fields that they had to fill up with the object come together. It creates a whole nother thing. It's like a contemporary image with this piece that who knows whose hands it went through and what kind of life it had. So that's my practice in a nutshell, I guess. Very multimedia, but the image is very important.
I wasn't expecting that response. Funny enough, because if I were to like to like describe your practice, I think I would start with the textiles. But it's funny, like, and this makes sense because just how you described your training, like you studied first photography, then you got into textile and other mediums. But I think
Yeah.
I would have described you first as a textile artist.
Mhm.
And I never
Yeah.
actually thought about like there are actually a lot of photographs, like archival photographs, but also your own original photography that you
Yeah.
include in your work.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about textiles since we're this video is for the Textile Society of America. Like
Yeah.
when did you learn how to sew?
I actually am self-taught, and I learned when I was in grad school. My mom does not sew, but both of my grandmothers did, and their mothers as well. But so I never did sewing as a child. I wasn't one of those little girls that their mom sat and taught them how to sew things. But when I started in grad school, I basically started because I needed to make two things stick together. So trying to figure out how to get these, create these quilts or pieces. And so I started taking classes in the fiber department, even though I was a photo grad, me sort of playing and experimenting in different ways. So they allowed me to take classes in the fibers department as part of my degree program. And so that was wonderful. I was able to pick up some different techniques and skills there. And then also this is kind of funny. At my church, a lady was visiting, and her last name was Petway. And I knew that last name because I had been studying the Gee's Bend quilters. And Petway was the name of I guess, the slave owner in that area. And so a lot of the Black population had the last name Petway that was from that area. And so I walked up to this woman. I was like, I've noticed your last name is Petway. Wouldn't happen to have any connection to the G's Bend Petways, would you? And she was like, oh, those are all my people. That's my family. And so through her, I was able to go one summer and hang out with some of the older women in G's Bend and sit in on some quilting circles. And I got a lot of tips from them as well. So just through picking up, self-taught, that experience, and then from being in the fibers department at the University of North Texas, then I was able to kind of hone those skills and get a little bit better at them. And I always do everything by hand. I like to see that in the work. I do have a sewing machine, but for me, it's like sculpture because it was my grandmother's sewing machine. So I just sew everything by hand.
And one thing that you told me that I just thought was really powerful is that you do source textiles online through Etsy or eBay,
Mhm.
but a lot of your textiles are actually heirloom fabrics from your grandmother, and you use those in your works as well. So you have a personal connection to the textiles. It's not just a medium that you're sort of manipulating, but you're sort of working with your own family history through using these textiles.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. That's important. And it's one of the things I really enjoy. It makes me feel like even though she's gone or my great grandmother is gone or an aunt, um, you know, it makes me feel like I'm collaborating with them. One of the pieces I did, which was in the show here at the LSU Museum of Art, was this clothesline piece called "Look What a Woman." And I made that piece in honor of my dad's mom, my grandmother. And so it has all of her heirloom fabrics on it, and including some quilt tops that her mom made, one which was beautiful silk quilt top. And I took pictures of her over the course of her life and scanned them and then printed them in like layers of value onto these fabrics. I think the earliest one, she was like 16 years old. And then maybe the last image of her was one that I took of her in a cotton field near her home. And so it was this beautiful collaborative piece between me with the contemporary images and that they were her fabrics, and even on past her to a great grandmother I never met,
Wow.
all come together in that piece, Look What a Woman's Got.
I mean, it's just a reminder that, we think about textiles as being these inanimate objects, but for a textile to be made, it has to pass through several hands and sometimes several generations. You're thinking about who cultivated the cotton, who picked the cotton,
Hmm.
who wove it into a textile,
Yeah.
who cut it and sewed it into a garment. Like,
Hmm.
what's the full history of a garment or of a textile? And I think your practice sort of highlights like the sort of multi-layered, multi-generational histories that textiles often hold.
Yeah. 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 And then, thinking about the fact that most of the pieces are made from cotton, and what that says when you know that this is about African American culture, the work, and how cotton has played such a huge role in just where we are as a people here, like our relationship with the land and the produce and the production of cotton. And okay, that's a whole nother conversation. I don't know if you want to go that route, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's all tied to slavery,
Yeah.
and why Black folks are even on the American continent. In
Yeah.
part, it was to help produce these commodities.
Mhm.
In the Deep South, in places like Louisiana or Texas or Mississippi, it was in the cultivation of cotton or sugarcane in some cases.
Yeah, sugarcane. That's true. That's true. And a particular kind of cotton, because
Hmm.
cotton is naturally a colored plant, but it's been
Huh.
genetically altered to be white, and it's now illegal to grow um, the natural varieties of cotton in the country because they don't want it to cross contaminate the white cotton.
That's fascinating. I had no idea about
Yeah, look
that.
into that because cotton is naturally beautiful. And in Louisiana, they have an Acadia cotton
Huh.
that like a reddish brown. If I was at home, I would show it to you. I've got but it grows naturally. It can be in like a pale blue color, a
Oh my
green color,
gosh.
reddish colors. I mean, really, really beautiful. And anyways, it's genetically altered
Huh.
to be this pure, pure white, and so they want to keep moving it that way.
I did not know that history. That's crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a whole like book you're describing, sort of the whitening of cotton.
Okay. It's really beautiful too. It's really beautiful.
Hmm. I mean, you work with textiles in some very like ingenious and innovative ways. I'm thinking about the first work that I encountered by you and the way you sort of you printed photograph, a photograph you probably took in Mississippi,
Mhm.
and use an embroidery loop
Yeah.
as the frame. I
Yeah.
love that.
Thank you. I've been enjoying that too and have been using embroidery hoops a lot, especially with the works I've been doing that deal with Black land wealth.
Mm,
And more recently, a project called A Tale of Two Greenwoods that I did to commemorate the Tulsa race massacres. And so I went to Tulsa and I took pictures of a block where there was no houses
mm,
and just the stairs. So very documentary in style. So 8 images of these groups of cement stairs that went to nowhere. It's like up a hill, you can
mm,
see trees and sky, but no house, you know? And then my father was from Greenwood, Mississippi. And a
mm.
lot of the residents that moved into the Greenwood district in Tulsa migrated from Greenwood, Mississippi to
Oh,
build that community. And so I went back to Greenwood, Mississippi, took my mom with me, and photographed the house my dad grew up in as a child, which was like a very simple wood frame, shotgun kind of house. And it was at the time I photographed it, which was this last winter. Um, it was painted a like a seafoam kind of green,
mm,
and all the houses right next to it were painted that same shade of green. And so I photographed that block. And I paired the images from Tulsa with the images from Mississippi, both of them framed in embroidery hoops, about 27 inches on the longest side, and jet them together as if they were those bifold frames people would put in their homes. But I love the idea of the embroidery hoop framing these images of home and
mm,
land and all these attempts as a culture we've tried to make to have something, to have wealth, land wealth to pass down, and the struggles that we face in that regard. You know, for me, it's really punchy to see these images of what could have been, what is framed in these embroidery hoops, because oftentimes when a woman uses an embroidery hoop to make something, she's making something precious for the
mm.
home. It's not going to be a dish rag. It's not going to, you know what I mean? This is going to be something that she's going to sit with. And the expectation is that it will get passed down through the generations, right? And then when you take that and you're thinking about, okay, these houses in Tulsa don't even exist. And then the ones that are in Mississippi, when you see them, you get that sense of um, poverty and lack of, just looking at that community. And so I've really been enjoying using the embroidery hoops because for me, they really speak to a culture's sort of lamentations about struggle, about what they want, about trying to build a life and have something to pass down to their children.
And I mean, hearing you speak about that work reminds me that we've been focused on Louisiana and Mississippi, sort of like the Delta,
Mhm.
but you also have a connection to Oklahoma because your parents actually moved there
Mhm.
after your father retired from the military.
Yeah.
Did they move to Tulsa, or was it another part of Oklahoma?
They were on the other side of the state. They were in Lawton.
Hmm.
It was my dad's last duty station there, and he ended up retiring. And after that, my mom was like, "Okay, we're not going to move anymore. We're going to just stay in this one spot. I'm going to work my job now." 'Cause she was a teacher, and so I actually graduated from Lawton Senior High, and then went on to the University of Oklahoma. But yeah, Oklahoma is important for that reason, and also because I was doing this project on land wealth and I was going around to all these different freedmen's towns
Hmm.
and taking pictures there. And Oklahoma and Kansas were huge for freedmen's towns. Like Oklahoma almost became a freedmen's state because they had so many freedmen's towns there, but that didn't get approved. But so that was the other main thing why I was working on that project. I had personal connection and through having lived in Oklahoma, and then the fact that Greenwood in Tulsa was kind of started by these people who migrated from Mississippi, and that I was really interested in those freedmen's towns, you know.
Can I ask you a hard question?
Okay.
If
Yep.
you had to choose one work that sort of represents you or your practice, which work would you choose?
You know, there is a piece I made while I was in grad school. It's called East Feliciana Altarpiece.
Mm,
And it was sort of inspired by the sort of workshops out of Italy where they would make those altar pieces, the old master style paintings, where it would be multiple images kind of quilted together to create, you know, this visual Bible, if you will, right? And so I made this piece, and it's multiple panels, and the frames are all. I guess the best way to describe it is they're sort of quilted together. They're all found frames. They don't match. And the center panel is a huge image of my Medea, my mom's mom, my grandmother. And she's sort of like she was the anchor for the family. And then the other panels have two different images quilted into it. One is of a goat, a lone white goat in a field. And the other side of it is a big moss covered tree in a junkyard with like rundown cars all around it. And those two places were sort of markers for me as a child that we were getting closer to my grandmother's house. You know, when you're little, you
mm,
don't know what street or what highway or whatever, but you know, okay, when we pass this spot, we're getting really close to where we're going. We recognize these markers. And I feel like that altar piece is probably the closest thing to like a self portrait of me because it ties in so many things that have been important to me as an individual and as an artist, like family and place. It's all on fabric, but the fabric that I used in that piece wasn't cotton, it was silk dupioni. So it had a like elegance to it, but there was all the slugs, you know, because it's not perfectly smooth, that
mm.
dupioni silk. It's got bumps and loose threads and all this kind of stuff. So it's like this elevated old master's piece, but in a way that's very feels very cultural in Louisiana to me. You know, it's a quilted together image. It's a quilted together, like all the piece itself are quilted, like of my grandmother. So it's not this perfectly smooth, idealized um, presentation, but for me, it's probably the most beautiful thing.
I love hearing you talk about that work because I actually saw it in person, and
Mhm.
I didn't know the backstory behind it, and
Yeah.
so I just love hearing your description of it because I mean one thing about your work is that there are a lot of portraits that you take, photographs that you take, but also you use archival photographs of family members, but also you also incorporate landscapes
Mhm.
into your work as well. And it
Yeah.
strikes me that place is really important for you. Like, and you've already talked about this, like, you know, your mother being from Louisiana, your father being from Mississippi, you haven't spent a significant part of your life in Oklahoma. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how place might be informing your work.
Yeah, I've always been really connected to the land. I'm kind of an outdoor nature sort of person, so I always feel most spiritual when I'm outside. Like there's something about that. And when I went to undergrad in Boston and I was studying photography, you know, photographers have a lot of rules about what you can and cannot do. And landscape was not looked at as a serious. I mean, it's, you know, Ansel Adams and all of that's great, but um, for a documentary photographer, it wasn't looked at as a serious form of expression. And so for a long time, I really put that to the side, and the landscape would pop up in subtle ways. Like no matter what project I was doing, I always found myself taking landscape work, and I might slip one or two in to a body of work. but something about place, maybe from being a army brat that moved around all the time, I became very sensitive to the location I was in. Like it was sort of important to my experience there, or the impact that Louisiana and Mississippi have had on me. Because even growing up, I was very aware of the difference between the two. Like there's a difference to the smell and a difference to the look, even though they're right there close together. And I was always sensitive to that. And so it's become really part of my visual voice, if that makes sense. It's like maybe like syncopation in music, where it's
Hmm.
this sort of off thing that, but it brings everything together, you know? And so, yeah, sense of place is very important um, in my work and the landscape and all of that.
And I can't help but think about the idea, and I'm going to mispronounce this word, so forgive me, but matrilineality. Thinking about, like, your mother's influence, your grandmother's influence, your great grandmother's influence. Like, I'm struck by the role of women, one in your creative practice, but that actually literally appear in your works. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, how like ideas of feminism might be playing into your work. Because I mean, that's one thing I really connected with when I saw your work. I come from a very um, matriarchal upbringing. I grew up in a single parent household. My sister was a big part in helping raise me. My mom has five sisters. My grandmother helped raise me. My great grandmother was a big part of my childhood. And so when I just think about like the important role of women. I'm even thinking about the work. There's a work that I saw by you, and it focused on nuns.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
think a lot about sort of like the role of strong women
Mhm.
in sort of upbringing and influencing people in artwork.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up with a lot of women around me as well. Um, and for whatever reason, my family just seemed to have all my cousins at my age range were mostly female. And uh, I was always obsessed, even as a young person, with the lives of women.
Hmm.
So I loved to read when I was younger, and I would always go to the stories of women and the experiences of young girls my age, or that sort of thing. When I was in Oklahoma, I read all the time about the experiences of Native American girls, or the Diary of Anne Frank, or just all these things that sort of kind of shaped me as I was coming up. So my focus, or one of the focuses I've had, is sort of continuing that, and hopefully taking what's looked at as sort of ordinary, like women's craft or women's handiwork, and elevating that to a whole nother level. So maybe I'm like an artist feminist in a way, because the focus so much is heavily on women. My son has told me that next project needs to be about men, about boys, because he feels like I'm getting a little too carried away with all this talk about women. But yeah, I'm really sort of in love with women and their stories and their experiences and their resilience. And even the quilting and the fabric pieces speak to that for me. The fact that a woman can take old scraps and things that should have been thrown away, stitch that together, and make it into something beautiful and give it a whole nother life. It, to me, is very symbolic of just how women of culture live their lives. Women of color live their lives. We're often picking up scraps and putting together a whole nother life. And so that has been a major theme going throughout the work. I do talk about family, so men tend to come in that regards, and like with the land project or whatever. But I'm just obsessed with women's experiences and their resilience.
I mean, hearing you speak makes me think of a passage from Beloved,
Mhm.
in which Setha is getting married and she wants to create a wedding dress for herself, but
Mhm.
she has to sort of like pick random textiles from around the Sweet Home, just named the plantation that she's working at, and she gets a net from one place and like a sack from another place, and she makes a wedding dress for herself, which she immediately has to take apart and like put everything back in its place after she gets married. But
Mhm.
just like the resourcefulness, the ingenuity of Black women.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just a little symbol of almost day-to-day experience, of just trying to make a beautiful life out of what we have available to us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and beyond like your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother and other women who influenced you in your life, who would you say, or what would you say, are your biggest inspirations or influences?
You mean like artists that admire or
It could be anything. It could be an artist. It could be a color. It could be a tree.
I'm a bit of a plant nut. My husband thinks that the house is being overrun with house vegetable garden. I'm here visiting with the kids, and he's at home. And he said when we get back, he's going to take a vacation from the house and the pets and all my plants. But so I would say nature is a huge, huge influence. Um, Music uh, and dance. Like I feel like my history in dance shows up in the work. Maybe I'm the only one that sees that, but it's okay. But the sort of rhythm and fluidness, and I feel like I'm a less is more kind of person, and so that it's that composure, that composition. I think that all is influenced by dance, and of course, the Deep South is a big, huge influence for me. We already talked about that, just like color and the smell, the sound of the people. Like I feel like all of that plays into what I do.
I mean, there's two things that I learned about you in the middle of this conversation. One, the importance of photography, and the fact that your introduction to artistic practice was actually through dance.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Dance was huge. Dance was huge. Dance actually exposed me to photography. I was in this. They had the camp in Oklahoma called the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute, and you had to compete to participate. It's like two or 3 weeks in the summer, and they would bring in these big professionals from all over the world to teach whatever discipline you were in. And so I got in modern dance, and and it's all kids your age, but they had like a full orchestra. They had um, they had poets, they had mimes, they had actors, they had you know painting and drawing, and they had photography. And it was the first time I saw photography as an art form. So it was my experience in dance that actually led me to like, wow, you can take a camera and do that. It's not just to sell something or report the news, you know? And so that's where dance kind of led me to photography.
Wow. So, I mean, in many ways, like you've done everything, whether it's dance or photography, textile art. You sort of have had your hands in many mediums, which is amazing. So,
It's been a journey.
are there any mediums you haven't dabbled in yet that you want to experiment in?
I kind of want to go back to dance. I just told my husband yesterday I'm going to be 50 on my next birthday, and I miss dance.
Hmm.
I kind of put dance down when I picked my camera up, and I miss that getting lost in the movement. So I told him we need to take swing dance lessons, and I need you to find a place and make it happen. So I want to go back to dance. I've started doing like installation works, and I'm enjoying that. So I think I would love to do some more large scale. There's a piece at the McNay Museum in San Antonio now where they let me have their entrance wall,
Ooh.
and it's huge. And they ended up purchasing it for their collection, and I really enjoyed that. So like some large scale installation work, I think would be fun.
Oh, I would love to see that. I would love to
Yeah.
see you sort of intervene in an entire house.
Yeah, yeah. If you go to
Everything.
San Antonio, it's up for the year.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So, it's up for the whole year.
Besides that work at San Antonio, do you have any other works that are currently on display or any shows coming up?
There's a show at the Macer Museum in Monroe, Louisiana, but that's going to be closing in August. There's a show at Bridge Projects in LA. Um, I'm getting ready to participate in a light exhibition at
Oh,
night in Fort Worth. And it's going to be in August, weekend of the 20th and the 21st. So if you're in Fort Worth, come check that out. They're going to have, I think it's about 8 artists in this area near downtown where they're taking images and allowing us to project them on buildings. So that's coming up. That should be fun. I'm excited about that.
oh, fun. Can you
Yeah.
say what you're going to project?
It's some images that I took of women with protest signs, women and
Oh my
girls,
God.
and I let them make their own protest signs. And so protest with bird sounds that I
Wow.
recorded. I recorded some bird sounds when I was in Tuscany. I did a residency in Tuscany. I didn't know what I was going to do because my work is so much about the deep south. And every morning it was like amazing sound of birds would wake me up. And I recorded the bird sounds and I brought them back to the States. Didn't know what I was going to do with them. Started researching, trying to figure out what the bird sounds were, and found out that there's a huge push to record the sounds of female birds because all of the recordings they have are of male birds.
Hmm.
And so that got me to thinking about women's voice and how oftentimes we're silenced or overlooked when it comes to our voice. So I did this project with these women and girls and let them make their own protest sign in response to the word suffrage. And they took it a number of different ways. So it's about 15 figures in the installation that will be projected, and then the sounds of the birds from Tuscany.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
I'm excited to see it all come together.
Yeah. I would love to see that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're going to wrap it up, but this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for setting time aside for
I
this.
appreciate it.
No, this is really special. Um, one last question. Anyone who's watching who wants to sort of follow your work or figure, like, know what you're doing, do you have a newsletter or, like, say
Yeah,
your
the
Instagram or?
Instagram. Yeah, it's Huckaby Studios. So that's probably the best way, or even the website, huckabystudios.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.